Moving on next, we have Dr. Dhir Jhingran, Founder Director of Language and Learning Foundation, presenting on Multiliteracies for Multilingual Learners, Making It Happen. Please welcome Dr. Dhir.
Thank you, British Council. Good morning, everyone. I think still good morning. Uh, I'm going to try and navigate an issue of multiliteracies for multilingual learners. This is a fairly recent concept or coinage of about 30 years or less than 30 years. This was a response to two trends in the Western world. The first, that based on migration, there was greater linguistic diversity in countries that were originally monolingual. And the second was the arrival of technology, where there were many different forms of language use that had appeared. So that's where multiliteracies is coming from. And to begin, as Dr. Harry and Dr. Meghanathan had also said, language learning is foundational to all learning. It's not just learning a subject. It is about how do you learn to learn. And that's why it's very important to understand that language is really crucial in developing a child's cognitive processes, as it says here, whether it's reasoning, thinking, talking, listening, problem solving, all of them use language. And it's very important that language is developed to a level which is not just basic skills, but core academic and analytical skills, because school studies require deep comprehension. And if we care for equity, if we care for all children learning, then it's important that all children acquire these strong skills. I'm going to try and bring in the context of CBSE schools as we go along. This is just an introduction. All of you have engaged with the new education policy and the NCF 2022 and 2023. And some sections that we hardly read there about values. It appears somewhere, right? Otherwise, we are focused on the syllabus and what do you do with language and math. The values, just to remind you, that the NEP and NCF promote. Please note, empathy, respect, tolerance, pluralism, equality. I'm putting this because I'm going to link this with multiliteracies for multilingual learners. So this is actually in the preamble and one of the most important parts of the new education policy. I'm a member of the National Committee for NCF, and we had great trouble about where we locate this and will people read it or not. The NCF also emphasizes abilities, right? Again, multilingualism, creativity, discovery, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, etc. We'll come back to it. How is it relevant for multiliteracies? And then it says that teaching and learning should be active, experiential, joyful, and use local contexts and cultures, right? So this is the backdrop of what NEP and NCF are saying. And just one more small thing, the NEP and NCF, you are aware, this is the NCF language section, basically which says that by the end of grade 2, which is the foundational stage, every child should be proficient in one language, they call it R1, reading and writing. That's not necessarily the child's first language or the most primary language, but the language that's being used initially in school, and some familiarity with a second language. By the end of grade 5, the child should have proficiency in both R1 and R2. And at middle school, we introduce a third language, and the expectation is that for R1 and R2, the child develops much stronger proficiency, and R3, there is spoken skills and basic reading and writing. So all of you are familiar with that. So I was just setting the context of what is the scope for multiliteracies for multilingual learners. Now the question is, how does this all apply to CBSE schools, right? We think we are quite different from a lot that's been talked about today, government schools in remote areas, in areas where children come to school speaking a completely different language. Uh, so let me just introduce the concept of multiliteracies, and then we will try and align to our CBSE schools context. As I said at the beginning, there are two dimensions to multiliteracies. As I said, it's a fairly new term. The first, of course, as we discussed, is including diverse social, cultural, and linguistic contexts, including a multilingual approach, right? So, as the NEP also says, that we are looking at how we could ensure there is tolerance, respect, dignity, equality for languages and cultures. It's not just languages. It is about children's contexts, backgrounds, cultures, and languages. How can that become a part of the school culture and teaching and learning? That's the one part which is multilingual. Multiliteracies tries to tackle one more part of it, which is that, as again it was mentioned earlier, because of technology and the world we are in now, right now, it's not enough to work only with print in our schools and classrooms. How can we combine print with audio, visual, digital forms while working with language or even with other subjects? So that's the other component, multimodal. So you've got various modes of language presentations, right? So multiliteracies is basically about the multilingual and diverse social, cultural contexts, as well as the multimodal context, print, audio, digital, images, music, etc. So that's the overall concept of multiliteracies. And the bottom line, according to me, is that the teaching of language and literacy must move from a uniform approach. Some of you may have heard of the science of reading, which says you start with phonological awareness, then you bring in letter sound associations, decoding, blending, etc., which is a kind of systematic approach called science of reading. With a focus of print, using a textbook mainly in one dominant language on the left-hand side. And if we were to follow a multiliteracy approach, it implies bringing in children's contexts and cultures into the classroom and taking into account their varied language abilities. In all your classrooms in schools, you would find that children have different language abilities. Also, their language backgrounds are different. Without the dominance of one language, that is very important. And using varied forms of communication, as we just discussed, not just text. So that's the shift which a multiliteracy approach would make from just using print, using one dominant language, a uniform approach that doesn't look at who are the children and what their background is, to be very focused on children's contexts, their varied language abilities, and use a variety of mediums and not just print. So it might seem a little abstract, but we'll come to the methods of doing this. But that is what multiliteracies are about. And to end here, just the concept stage. So teaching of language and literacy, therefore, conventionally is text-bound. And we can move towards using a variety of materials. Someone mentioned newspapers, podcasts. We can bring all of that into the classroom. Therefore, not dependent on print alone. A variety of books can be used. That's multimodal on this side. Professor Meghanathan talked about, in our schools, languages are taught in compartments, isolated. Dr. Harry also mentioned that languages actually develop in an interdependent manner. We don't have to keep them isolated. This is English only time, this is Hindi only time, or Kannada only time, because that's really monolingualism that we are encouraging. It's double monolingualism or triple monolingualism, English, Hindi, etc. But what we need is multilingual, which has been talked about. And conventionally, teaching of language and literacy has been not very contextual, and therefore, how do you bring in local context and culture? So that's, in a way, summarizes what is the concept of multiliteracies. And the outcomes of multiliteracy, fairly straightforward if you look at if you're bringing in diversity, so classrooms reflect empathy, mutual respect, and tolerance. Again, NEP is very strong on this because we are saying that every child is important. Their context, culture, their language, and experiences have to be brought into the classroom. And on the right-hand side, you can see that classroom teaching and learning is contextualized, bringing in diverse perspectives. Diverse is quite important. No classroom is homogeneous, so how do we bring in perspectives? And the outcome really is that children acquire multiple literacies, so in multiple languages, but also multimodal. So they're able to work with a variety of mediums, right? They can work with print, digital, etc. So maybe it's still a little abstract, but the two dimensions, if we can remember, diversity, contextuality, and looking at varied language abilities, and on the other side, looking at forms of learning which are not just based on a single text or just on print. So using a variety of other forms which are crucial in this day and time. Now, the question is, this is all good. What about CBSE schools? We are slightly different, right? We are here for uniformity, national integration is one way of looking at how these schools could function. But CBSE schools are not homogeneous. They're not homogeneous across the country and not homogeneous even within a school or a classroom. There are many CBSE schools now in smaller towns. I was at a school, I was visiting a government school, went to a CBSE school in Bhilai, and very different from what you'd see in a big school in Delhi. We have in most schools children who've come in through the EWS quota, right? And their background is quite different. And that makes every school, every big private school, CBSE school, a diverse school from language, culture, and context point of view. So we cannot keep ourselves away from the thinking that, and all of you are working on this, of course, but just because CBSE also has this issue of diverse contexts and cultures. State government schools are getting included. I was in Assam the other day, and they have an Adarsh Vidyalaya scheme where there are 56 schools in remote and interior, what are called educationally backward blocks, which are English medium. Now, this is like an oxymoron, right, in a way. Remote, backward, English medium, right? But that's there. And they're CBSE, by the way. They're all CBSE schools. Many states are approaching CBSE for affiliation right now. The exclusive kind of CBSE schools that we look at urban centers and big metropolises is changing. Some schools are, of course, already there. Sikkim, Delhi, Chandigarh, etc., Arunachal. But many more state governments are pushing for aligning and affiliating with CBSE. Balvatika, which is the kindergarten class, is now kind of CBSE schools are being nudged towards that. In Kendriya Vidyalayas, etc., it's been made mandatory that there will be. And Balvatika is a time where children come in first to school, and their context, what they come with, what language they come with, is even more important. And in several states, you may be aware that state languages are also mandated in CBSE schools. It's not just English and Hindi. Kannada, Marathi, Tamil. So CBSE schools do have a context which requires an understanding of what multiliteracies are about and what does it mean to work with multilingual learners. So that's the context of CBSE. Obviously, we know, as was mentioned, that children come from diverse backgrounds. School is not the only place from which they learn. So community, family, and that weighs a lot on children, their identity, their cultures, and it's important to keep that into account. This is a survey that was done not before this conference, but a couple of years ago with CBSE principals. And the question was, this was when the NEP and NCF had just come out, 23. What would you find most difficult to implement? School principals. And 20% said including new languages as mediums of instruction. I think the circular of CBSE had just come out, 2023 circular, right? And then, of course, they had other things, holistic development, providing a wide variety of choices for secondary education. You know that, especially for schools that are smaller in other areas, this is not easy, right? To have teachers and introduce that. So things like this. But quite important was about languages and how difficult it is to do that. This is about 100 CBSE principles. Uh, Other question was, how difficult are the challenges faced by your school for integrating the children who come through the RTE Act, right? And you will see about 80% said it's either really difficult, but we are able to manage, right? That's the approach that was there in those schools, in that response. And the last question was, do you think children in early grade CBSE schools, grades 1, 2, and 3, face any learning disadvantage on account of the fact that they may not know the medium of instruction very well, as Dr. Harry was talking about? Uh, One would have expected CBSE, maybe that's not an issue. Most children should be able to. So, yes, many said it's not an issue, 48%, but the remaining, about 40%, about 40% said that it is there, common in CBSE schools, not for all children, but some children. And then if we stand for learning of all children, that means it is an issue that is facing a lot of CBSE schools. So this was from principal school leaders of CBSE schools some time back. This is that circular which we don't know what to do about, right? It's there. It's there, and I'm sure the CBSE will not be really pushing it, but it's there. Somehow the circular confuses multilingual education with introducing mediums of instruction. And I want to dispel that. I want to say very clearly that one can still have a multilingual approach even if we are not able to introduce several mediums of instruction. Let's talk about that, because that is something that all of you can do, if not easily. So I come to the last section, which is about, therefore, we've understood what are understood or kind of understood. What is multiliteracies for multilingual learners? Again, to recap, bring in children's diverse contexts into the classroom. Look at their varied language abilities. That's important. And see how do you work with them in a multilingual approach. That's the bottom line there. And then, of course, use a variety of texts and a variety of modes for learning language. Now, suggestions I have here, and it's a little presumptuous that I'm making some suggestions right now, but I thought one should end with some specifics also. It's very important that we create awareness, understanding, and some conviction about a multilingual approach amongst teachers, school leaders, and even the education ecosystem. Because this is related to a change in mindsets and attitudes. We are not talking about introducing a lot of languages as mediums or even as subjects. It is a mindset that children's languages and cultures can come into the school and should come into the school. And slowly over time, this could become a normative or default behavior. And that's why it's called a habitus, almost how a teacher or school leader responds is by default that it's fine to use more languages. It is not enough, it's not appropriate to use one dominant language only, English only, or Hindi only. So that's according to me, the very important first level awareness creation is absolutely crucial. Obviously, when we are working and some children are not very familiar with the language that is used as the medium of instruction, in this case maybe English or maybe something else, Hindi maybe, a focus on oral language development is very important. And we all know, we learn languages through natural exposure to language. And often schools tend to undermine oral language work because they have to get on with the syllabus. So a focus on oral language, whether it's the language that children know or unfamiliar language, is absolutely crucial. I don't know how many of you have seen or maybe watching Patal Lok, second season? Lots of you, right. Do you hear a language in the background? Yeah? That's Nagamese. That is a language, it's a pidgin language, which is Assamese, some Hindi, some Bangla, and some local Naga dialects as well. And look at the communication that's happening there. So strong, right? We look at subtitles. But why can't these languages come into the classroom, at least in the oral domain? Right? So, and even if the children don't study through this. And therefore, what I'm talking about is how can teachers help, school leaders help in use of local languages, for example, for explaining difficult concepts. It can't be English only, right? If you know that the children there are not clearly, or some children are not understanding, then let's encourage teachers to use that. Also, I think it's very important that children are encouraged to use, as Dr. Harry was saying, their strong linguistic resources, right? A child may be able to use a mix of English and Hindi maybe at that point to express themselves. Let's encourage that. Because what is very important is thinking, reasoning, and communication. Again, I get back to the NEP, which says creativity, discovery, critical thinking, etc. That can't happen if you are forced to only speak in one language. So how do you ensure that children can use whatever set of resources they have in different languages, use them in a manner they are able to express themselves most effectively? Just practical ways in which multiliteracies can come into the classroom. And then, because we are saying respect and tolerance of other cultures and languages, one very important principle is reciprocity. There are children in the classroom, they may be, in this Bhilai classroom, there were children who were coming from a Odia speaking background, Hindi, Chhattisgarhi, very few Bangla, one or two. How do you foster, how do you ensure that every child is able to, one, speak their language, or also interact, or showcase, or at least there's a feeling that all languages are valued inside that classroom, right? Not easy to do, but still, it's worth doing. You'll see the way the classrooms transform completely. I don't know it's going to work or not. Let me try. This is a classroom in Maharashtra, Marathi classroom, where the teacher is trying to encourage children, and actually doing it well, to talk about their own context. This has got a lot of migrants from Bihar and Eastern UP who are there, to talk about their festivals, cultures in their own language, and then also trying to see how these languages can be written. Let's make an attempt here. Right. So just to say that this can happen, I had a longer clip. I'm not. Yeah. So I come back to that, creating a multilingual habitus in the classroom that promotes inclusion of several children's languages and cultures. And just moving on to some more practical tips. Of course, all of you already know that supporting children to learn English, especially those who come from a background which is not strong in English, or they come from a deprived socioeconomic background. For them, it's an unfamiliar language. And how do you support such children? The question is that in our CBSE schools, maybe in Delhi, Uh, this support is required for a few children for a few years. So it's about early learning when they are still getting familiar with English and they can learn through English. But some children may require this support and scaffolding for longer. So are we ready that children who are even in grade 5, 6, etc., can get support of a familiar language while they navigate really difficult content in a language that is still not too familiar for them. So I think that's very important. Um, this has been mentioned earlier also, and really I think British Council is taking the lead in that as well. Uh, Not an English-only environment, even while teaching English. Use the scaffold that's available for other children, for other languages. Uh, and then, of course, as I mentioned to you, that using examples from local culture, context, knowledge systems. And this can be done even if the teacher does not know the local context and culture. Very often in CBSE schools, I worked in Assam for long, the Kendriya Vidyalayas teachers were mostly from other states. But if we were to believe in this, there are various ways of how do we promote local culture, get that into the classroom, children speak and talk about what is close to their hearts, especially in the primary years. Coming to the last aspect of what I mentioned about multimodal. Can you remember the diagram which had two parts to it? The first was more linguistic, diverse context. The second was more including audio, digital, and other modes, which are very crucial today, which sometimes we feel, no, बच्चे जो हैं अभी यहाँ से भटक जाएंगे फिर, क्योंकि वो तो उनके लिए तो प्रिंट, हम कैसे बुक्स पढ़ते थे, बुक्स बहुत अच्छी चीज़ है. True, to some extent, but the point is that that's the world we live in. We've got to do something about it. And therefore, engaging children with audio and video-based discussions, of course, linking it then to print. There could be a handout, a story. Also, older children can do projects. We had an example from Dr. Meghnadhan about such a project, which could involve using social media, posts, creating some podcasts, creating some, audio, video kind of presentations, which can then be also put down in writing. So you're working between different mediums there. And of course, again, from the language point of view, let's write it in English and let's see how it appears in Hindi. And let's read that and see if it's good or not. AI will do it immediately, right? And let's do it in Marathi, even though there may not be any Marathi students there, but let's translate to Marathi and let's see, let someone try and read it. So using technology for subtitling, and kids are good at this. So not confining our language classroom to be reading one textbook only, but diverse books, but also diverse modes of learning that will, of course, be attractive to children, but they're also very useful for everyone in real life today. So that's, I think, important. And then, of course, as I mentioned to you, text should not be confined to a uniform set. We are all tied to NCERT, CBSE books, right? All of us. And पहले बात आई थी कि syllabus खत्म करना है, big issue. Let's try it for primary, middle schools. Bring in newspapers. I'm sure many of you do it already. But journals, blogs, other books, newspapers, even if we talk about print, a variety is absolutely crucial because that gives the child an exposure to what print is about. Print is not about that lesson in the textbook. So that is important. And I think that's it. But I'll close by saying that introducing multiliteracies in our classrooms is really, especially multilingual classrooms, as most of our classrooms are, is an issue of mindsets, as I said, and promoting mutual respect and tolerance for other languages and cultures is the bottom line, really. And this can be done by a teacher and a school leader who believes in this, because school culture is really, really very crucial. Finally, one teacher cannot do it independently. Does the school promote, understand, encourage this kind of local cultures and languages. And I think this is a big way in which we can try and see how the education policy can actually get operationalized. Thank you so much.